Welcome to the online workshop for effective practices for school improvement. I am Tiara Booker-DeWire, the Director for the Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement. I will be co-presenting with Laura Licioni, the School Leadership and Turnaround Support Specialist in my office. Today's workshop will provide you with an overview of the 4 domains of rapid school improvement, which is Maryland's framework for school improvement. For each domain in the framework, effective practices for improving school performance will be shared. Additionally, connections will be made between effective school improvement and leadership practices. This workshop will serve as a foundation for professional learning experiences provided by the Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement. Research supports a strong connection between effective leadership and school improvement. As a result, the Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement purposefully integrates school improvement practices with leadership development work. My office has a focus on 3 targeted areas: fostering the growth of effective leaders, ensuring valid and reliable evaluations, and raising the quality of education. These 3 areas complement one another to promote equity, agency, learning, and achievement for all Maryland educators and students. My office works across divisions at the Maryland State Department of Education to align support for the 3 focus areas. This online workshop is focused on school improvement. It is intended for school leaders of any school, not just leaders in low-performing schools, because all schools must engage in a cycle of continuous improvement to ensure continuous student growth.
There are 3 levels of support provided by the Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement to raise school performance. At the universal level, professional learning experiences and resources are available to all school systems through statewide convenings and online resources. At the customized level, support is provided to select schools in collaboration with school systems. Schools at the customized level of support are provided with specialized professional learning experiences informed by the school data and leadership coaches to support effective implementation of school improvement strategies. At the concentrated level, support in select schools from the Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement is increased. All support from the Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement is grounded in the professional standards for educational leaders and the 4 domains of rapid school improvement. The professional standards for educational leaders emphasize school improvement and focus on the academic success and well-being of each student. The 4 domains of rapid school improvement focus on a systems approach with coherent guidance and support from the state and school system to improve school performance. Both of these documents are grounded in research and effective practices that improve the educational outcomes for students. The 4 domains of rapid school improvement is the linchpin for the state's cycle of continuous improvement. For each of the 4 domains, school leaders will engage in this cycle to improve school performance. This online workshop will focus on providing clarity for each of the 4 domains: turnaround leadership, talent development, instructional transformation, and culture shift within the cycle of continuous improvement. At this time, the Regional Education Laboratories Mid-Atlantic and the Center for School Turnaround West Ed will review the 4 domains.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, my name is Amy Eben, and I'm with the Regional Education Laboratory in the Mid-Atlantic region. I'm joined by my colleague and Assistant Director of the Center on School Turnaround, Dr. Lene Dunn. We are so excited to be partnering with the Maryland State Department of Education on these leadership modules regarding effective school improvement practices. Let's begin by talking for a minute about improvement efforts, regarding what has worked and what hasn't when attempting to improve school outcomes. First, let's acknowledge that school improvement is incredibly complex change and unfortunately can and often does fail in making an impact on student outcomes. What we've learned by studying effective, sustainable improvement efforts versus those not as effective and not as sustainable is that improvement fails not for a whole host of reasons, but mainly these 6. As you'll see across the boxes, the process of change can be just as important as what gets changed. So think about your own improvement efforts. How and when were you successful? Maybe less successful. Why might that have been? Hopefully these modules will help you think through both your process and your content for your own improvement efforts. Let's start with the top row. If there's a focus on too many or perhaps conflicting or changing priorities, your staff may not know what they're supposed to be aiming for. If staff aren't supported in enacting changes, we find that improvement is less likely to occur. If there's not enough of a stretch in expectations and they're really not rigorous enough, business as usual tends to occur. And as we know, business as usual will create outcomes as usual. We find that if evidence-based practices are not used, you might end up spinning your wheels on strategies, practices, resources that may not work. This could certainly frustrate you as a leader and frustrate your staff and students, as well as making them less likely to support any improvement efforts you may try in the future. If progress is not monitored, let's talk for a minute about progress. Progress monitoring is an important check on how your school improvement effort is doing. If progress is not monitored often, it's difficult to know whether your efforts are making an impact. It's also difficult to know why your efforts might not be working. Is it an implementation fidelity issue? Were changes implemented in the way they were designed to be effective? Let's say you've implemented a highly effective evidence-based reading curriculum, so you check that box. But if effective implementation means training your teachers for at least 40 hours on the new curriculum, and they didn't receive that training, you may not see changes to reading levels in the way that you had hoped. Lastly, what we find is that change efforts fail when they fail to make the necessary mid-course corrections. Those mid-course corrections are only determined from progress monitoring. Maybe you figured out after the first 6 weeks that your teachers aren't even using this new evidence-based reading curriculum because they haven't been trained. So a mid-course correction might be to provide that 40 hours of training to ensure effective implementation. But then be sure that you monitor the reading levels again soon, because as we'll talk quite a bit in this series of modules, just because you provide training or just because you implement a practice doesn't necessarily mean it was effective. Progress needs to be monitored to determine whether it was or not. The Center on School Turnaround attempts to capture the lessons learned and effective practices of successful improvement in their framework, the 4 domains of rapid improvement, which MSD, as you heard, has adopted as their school improvement framework. On the registration page and in the resources section of these modules, you'll see the 4 domains document listed in the resource section. I would encourage you to read and review the whole document. There are a total of 4 modules or chapters in this video, 1 for each of the 4 domains. In these modules, we will discuss why each of the domains are important and why the practices reviewed have found to create sustainable improvement, the role of the school leader or leadership team in enacting these practices, what practices might look like when implemented effectively, and what might be some evidence of implementation that you can review in your own context. To help you begin determining your own needs and your school's needs, each module also contains reflection questions. If you are completing this workshop to earn CBD credits, your answers need to be submitted to the Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement. You'll find email addresses both at the beginning and the end of this video. We're also asking that you provide feedback on the modules via a survey. Your feedback is incredibly helpful and important in making professional learning experiences best meet your needs. You can find the survey link in the resources section of the video and at the end of these modules. You only need to complete the survey once, regardless of the number of domains you access. So without further ado, and with great pleasure, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague and co-author of the 4 Domains of Rapid Improvement, Dr. Lene Dunn. She will take us deeper into the research and practice of the domains. Lene?
Thank you so much, Amy. Well, as we start to look across this framework, I wanted to note how a successful rapid school improvement really requires a system approach with coherent guidance and support from the state and the system or district level to complement the actions of the school. A successful rapid school improvement is more than just that initial bolt of changes in structure, authority, or personnel. It includes those phases in which effective practices and processes are routinized and sustained. So as we move into the domains, I want you to keep in mind that the domains, it's not a silver bullet. It's really a framework that organizes the issues that the state, system, and school leaders should consider when planning for successful and sustainable rapid school improvement. Those decisions about what practices to implement and when and how should take into account the particular needs and context of an improvement effort. So local context and implementation really influence the outcome of any improvement undertaking. No single strategy alone can yield the scale and scope of improvement that's needed. So as we look at the first domain, it's turnaround leadership. And as we think about this, this is really leadership across all levels of the system, the state, the system or district level, and the school. Leaders focus on improvement at all of those levels, drive initiatives to facilitate rapid, significant improvement for low-performing schools. In each domain, you will see that there are 3 practices, and we're going to talk through each of these practices as we discuss the domain. But I want to just give you some framing and some orientation before we do that. Keep in mind that because the state agency, the system, and the school function collectively as a system, leaders' initiatives at any one level of the system affect other levels. So in accordance with this priority focus, leaders align policies, structures, resources, and personnel in a cohesive system designed to affect school improvement. Strong leadership within this domain means that leaders share their vision of success and use it as a beacon or a destination, harnessing the efforts and coordinating the work of all staff so that the system they lead becomes cohesively focused on executing a data-informed improvement plan focused on priorities. Leaders provide targeted support based on those priority needs. Across all levels, leaders are involved and committed to improvement. They monitor initiatives and work directly up close and accept responsibility and share credit for the results. So we're going to look at each of the practices under this turnaround leadership domain. Before we do that, we want to just think about taking a step back and thinking, well, what does this really mean? What as we think about turnaround leadership as a domain, should we take away from it? We want you to think about and take away that clear goals and expectations for improvement are really important. Leaders across all levels of the system work to set the conditions for success. Providing those clear goals and expectations and providing both support and autonomy as appropriate can really help provide the structures and the supports needed to provide strong turnaround leadership. Clear goals and expectations really means that the leaders offer defined progress measures and improvement goals. It's like Amy was talking about earlier, making sure to monitor your efforts and see if you're moving in the direction towards your North Star is really important. And aligned support means that support from various sources, that could be coaches or state or system level coaches, they don't conflict in their content or approach. They're really giving an integrated support. And further, schools are given an appropriate level based on the context of autonomy to make changes and lead initiatives. For example, we know that school level leaders can make a difference in student outcomes, but you have to set the conditions to support leaders. The leaders might need other support for instructional leadership or for just managing the day-to-day in order to focus on improving student outcomes. Across these practices, you'll note how the school leadership role focuses on building leadership capacity across faculty and staff to build a clear plan focused on a few high leverage priorities. The first practice in this turnaround leadership domain is to prioritize improvement and communicate its urgency. This aligns with the PSEL Standard 1. So setting a direction for improvement and establishing clear policy structures and expectations for constituents to work towards ambitious improvement goals. So setting that North Star and helping ensure that the structures are there to meet it. Articulate a commitment to turning around the lowest performing students in schools and advocate fiercely across audiences. So showing that you're really focused on this and that you're providing a focus for the community and all constituents to rally together and really show that the urgency for making this change, and why that urgency is there, and how, as a school and a system, you're going to work towards that. And then closely monitoring, discussing, reporting, and acting upon the progress of students and schools undertaking rapid improvement. So not only are you monitoring, but you're making sure to act upon what you're learning to make those mid-course corrections that Amy talked about earlier. So as you review these practices, if you have the 4 domains for rapid school improvement document with you, you can look at the role examples for state, system, and school. For this practice, you'll notice one of the suggested roles for the state and the district is to identify leaders within the state and system agencies devoted to improvement. This sends a strong message about the importance of improvement. Further, these leaders can ensure that they're acting upon the data they're seeing about progress of schools to alter or adjust their support. At the school level, a suggested role is to develop leadership teams to build capacity for leadership towards collective commitment to improvement. So it's not just owned by the recognized principal or school leader, but you're building a cadre of leaders across the school to really champion and communicate the urgency for improvement. As I mentioned, this is aligned with PSEL Standard 1. Effective educational leaders develop, advocate, and enact a shared mission, vision, and core values of high-quality education and academic success and well-being of each student. The second practice under this domain is to monitor short and long-term goals. And this is aligned with PSEL Standard 10. So develop goals informed by recent performance data and trends in the data. So look at those trends over time and identify practices aimed at realizing a clearly articulated vision of significantly improved student learning. Establish milestones for gauging progress. Continually update timelines and tasks to maintain the pace needed to accomplish meaningful goals quickly. So if you're not reaching the milestones at the speed that's expected, go back and think about the timeline and the tasks that are needed to meet those goals, and really do that as a team to see how you're working towards those goals and how you could adjust to better meet those. Respond to regular feedback on progress towards goal-oriented milestones and make timely changes in policy, programs, and personnel to get on track in achieving desired results for students. So if you're going down a path and it's not working, don't be afraid to re-examine and think about what needs to happen and make those mid-course corrections. Capitalize on initial improvement successes and momentum to shift the focus from change itself to incorporating and establishing effective organizational processes, structures, and interactions that contribute to continuous organizational improvement. So building it into your system, building it into the way you do things. As you look at the role examples for the state, district, and school, you'll notice one of the roles for the state and the system level is to support schools in developing actions and timelines for using data on a regular basis, like interim as well as annual assessments, to look at both the leading and lagging indicators of successful improvement. At the school level, the leader role emphasizes developing and using a plan with short and long-term goals to keep improvement efforts on track. This is aligned to PSEL Standard 10, School Improvement. Effective educational leaders act as agents of continuous improvement to promote each student's academic success and well-being. We're going to move into the final practice under this domain, which is to customize and target support. So provide customized, targeted, and timely support for improvement efforts. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's really thinking about what support's needed in order to attain these goals and reach that improvement North Star that you've set. Align support to ensure coherence and integration with other necessary initiatives and eliminate unnecessary initiatives. You want to stay laser focused on your priorities. So as you're looking at all of the initiatives and the things that you're doing, ensure that there's alignment there. Because if you have too many unfocused priorities, then you're not going to be able to achieve the results you're looking for. Regularly monitor progress to identify support needs and then act quickly and competently to address those needs. So that, again, you're able to be nimble in the way that you're providing support and you're using data to make those decisions about where to provide support and how to act to address those needs. As you look at the roles for this practice, you'll see the suggestion that the state and district or system level provide tools such as root cause analyses and needs assessments to help inform school priorities and actions with differing levels of autonomy and support based on the school's capacity. So this support, in order to be useful, must be based on the identified needs and be responsive to those needs. At the school level, the school leader and leadership team helps the school stay focused on just 3 to 5 immediate priorities. Where is that focus that's going to get you to your North Star and get you to those goals? This is aligned to PSEL Standard 9, Operations and Management. Effective educational leaders manage school operations and resources to promote each student's academic success and well-being. With each of these domains, we're going to have a sort of make it real example. And the first one, we're going to have Dr. Bryan Iyer talk a little bit about turnaround leadership. Dr. Bryan Iyer is currently a leadership development specialist with the Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement. He's a former high school principal and principal supervisor. He'll briefly discuss the specific actions he took as a principal to prioritize improvement.
In order to prioritize improvement, I convened my leadership team in the summer prior to the start of the school year. I worked with my leadership team to build their understanding of what data is needed, what does data indicate, and what needs to be done to improve student achievement as defined by the data. We engaged in a continuous cycle of data analysis throughout the school year to inform school improvement decisions and adjust school improvement strategies. My school leadership team created subcommittees to support school improvement work. The school leadership team was able to drive instructional improvement throughout the school building because they owned the data and were committed to school improvement. School leaders must establish the structures and expectations that student achievement is a priority. School leaders can foster commitment from school staff by building their capacity and then distributing leadership to make school improvement a reality.
Thank you, Lene, and thank you, Bryan. As you listen to Lene describe the practices in this domain and Bryan describe his experiences, you may have thought, yes, we are already doing that. Or you may have scratched your head and thought, I don't really know what that would look like in my building. What we're going to move into now are concrete examples of how these practices can be enacted effectively, what that might look like, and what might be some evidence of effective implementation. For further information, I would point you to the resources section of the video. There is a second resource called the Center on School Turnarounds, Indicators of Effective Practice. The way I like to think about these indicators is really synonymous with effective implementation. So let's use an example. If you were going to implement PLCs, what would be indicators or components of effective PLC implementation? Let's say you'll be starting PLCs in the fall. It's a strategy many schools employ, so you'll figure it'll work for your staff too. Your staff have already identified that they need time with their peers to plan. The schedule has been reconfigured for the fall, so teachers have time to meet collaboratively. That may be all you need. Teachers may take it on to themselves to organize and use the time for a true PLC. But if you really want your PLCs to be successful, there are ways to set up implementation to be most effective. First and foremost, you might determine and communicate goals and reasons why you're implementing a PLC. What are you hoping a PLC will accomplish for your teachers and most importantly, your students. As Lene talked about, how will PLCs get you to your North Star? And how is this connected to your school improvement efforts? Again, that North Star. 2, provide teachers the collaborative planning time. Check, you already got that. 3, and this is where sometimes improvement efforts get overlooked. Train teachers on the PLC process and framework. 4, determine roles and responsibilities for running the meetings, determining agendas, following up on decisions. You may have to start out a bit more structured and then ease that structure a bit as folks get used to this type of running their meetings. And then ensure accountability for your teachers and your staff. For you, hold this time precious and have leadership attend these as well so they can help support teachers as they make their decisions to best support students. Lastly, one indicator of effective PLC implementation might be around tracking data. In fact, it's probably one of the most important. Track student data and data toward your initial goals of the PLC. So let's jump into some indicators of effective practice pertaining to the leadership domain. Lene introduced us to practices 1A, B, and C. 1A is about prioritizing improvement and communicating its urgency. What are some indicators of effective practice? You'll find those in the black text on the slides. In other words, what might this look like when implemented effectively? Well, effective implementation of practice 1A consists of an improvement plan, and we'll talk about different components, how the plan was developed, uses of the plan as we go through 1B and 1C. But to be effective, this plan has to have a vision, a theory of action, goals, and strategies to meet those goals if you don't already have them. Identify staff roles and responsibilities for enacting and monitoring progress of those goals and communicating those goals. Using different modes of communication to regularly share improvement priorities with staff, students, parents, and the broader community. So what might this look like in your building? Maybe you develop leadership teams, and through doing so, you build leadership capacity among your staff for improvement. You might work to increasingly distribute leadership roles and responsibilities among your staff. And in doing so, you solidify their commitment, you increase their collaboration, and you provide staff with new challenges to keep them meaningfully engaged in the improvement effort. What you're doing here is linking with Domain 2, all about talent development, talent management, which we'll get into, and discusses priorities for retaining high-quality staff. You might need to, if you haven't already, share improvement priorities with students, faculty, and the school community. Again, building in here on Domain 4 and really getting into that systems mindset of how can you get closer to your North Star in implementing practices across these 4 domains. It doesn't have to be piecemeal, but should be integrated and working toward and aligned to your goals. Maybe you leverage local media outlets, social media, newsletters, robocalls to announce the school's commitment to change and enlist parent and community partners in this effort. So what might you look for to see and determine to what extent you're already implementing these practices? Maybe you have the written improvement action plan itself. Maybe you have documentation of how and what staff are leadership team members, what their roles and functions have been assigned, evidence that you've shared with them what those roles and functions might be. Maybe you have communication examples, newsletters, a slide deck of presentations, media posts. But before we move on, I want to make one important distinction. These indicators are not a playbook. They're not a checklist. They will help set you up for success, but they won't guarantee it. They'll certainly help you envision and implement practices found to be effective to school improvement, but they won't tell you whether the practice was effective. It's just like the 40 hours of training for teachers. It's just like all the indicators of effective PLC implementation. Without them, there may not be much hope for success or for progress. But just because you provide those things or just because you've set up those things doesn't necessarily mean it was effective. Whether these practices were successful or not in your own context, you will need to determine. This is why monitoring progress for both implementation and impact is so important. Let's talk about what indicators of effective practice for practice 1B might look like. 1B, as Lene shared, is about monitoring short and long-term goals. Maybe this is you develop, if you haven't already done so, or you update your improvement plan to ensure that it has clear short and long-term goals. Maybe you and your leadership team, that is, the one you developed via Practice 1A, monitor the progress of implementation and make changes mid-course in staffing, programs, and methods as needed to keep your effort on track. In this practice area is where you regularly determine the impact of your practice. Monitoring is also about making changes to the plan if needed, as Lene shared. Don't be afraid to make mid-course corrections. The point is not to be right at the beginning, it's to continually monitor and address and make changes as needed to keep you moving toward your goals. If you're not seeing progress, determine why and intervene quickly. So some evidence of implementation here might include a plan based on that needs assessment, connections in whatever you're planning to do, connections to those needs are indicated in your improvement plan. Short and long-term goals, beginning with baseline and incremental but rigorous milestones to ensure progress is being made. And practice C is about customizing and targeting supports to meet needs. So through conducting your needs assessment and root cause analysis, you and your leadership team will identify the priority needs of your school. And what we found in research is that focusing on 3 to 5 immediate priorities helps keep everyone focused, as Lene shared. You may request, if you haven't already done so, flexibility from established policies and procedures at the district, such as district training, curriculum rollouts, as justified by your data, your improvement plan, perhaps the professional learning needs of your teachers, which we'll get to in the next domain, and your school's capacity. Again, some evidence of implementation of effective practices here might be your plan again, evidence of progress monitoring, maybe that takes the form of meeting minutes or decisions made based on progress monitoring, and a stated and written and shared process for progress monitoring, along with expectations and responsibilities. As we shared in the beginning, each module, each section contains self-reflection questions. Feel free, as you download the document from the resources section, to revisit these indicators of practice and the evidence of implementation as you reflect on your own practices and needs. If you are completing this workshop to earn continuing professional development credits, then your answers must be submitted to the Office of Leadership and School Improvement. I'd like to turn it back to Lene to take us deeper into Domain 2, Talent Development.
Thank you, Amy. So you'll notice as we go through the domains that even though there are 4 discrete domains, there's a lot of interaction and overlap between them, in that to rapidly improve, you must ensure that elements of all of these domains are effectively in place. Even if you just focus on 1 or 2 initially, really thinking about how all these domains work together is a really important frame as you go through these. The second domain on talent development really looks at multiple aspects of talent development across all levels of the system, at the state, school system, and school level. The domain of talent development focuses on ensuring strong, committed, and competent staff are hired, developed, and sustained across all levels of the system. So not just getting the right people there, but helping ensure that the right people stay there to make the kind of long-term change that will improve the system and the school. Improvement requires deliberate thought across all aspects of talent management. Competent and committed personnel at every level and in every position, and policies and procedures to identify, select, place, retain, and sustain these personnel, especially teachers and school-level leaders. The competencies specific to school improvement are identified and used to select and develop teachers, model teachers, and leaders. At all levels, educators utilize and hone their instructional and transformational leadership to build capacity in those they supervise by continually balancing support with accountability. So within this domain, we have 3 practices that we'll dig more into and help you understand how these might apply in your context. So the first practice, before we get to the first practice, we want to do that step back and say, well, so what do we want to take away from this domain? What's really important to understand? What's important to really reflect on is that from a systemic perspective, there are lots of states and districts and schools that are struggling with identifying and retaining teachers. So the reality is that many schools, particularly those in need of improvement or in communities struggling with poverty and other constraints, are less able to fill teaching positions with highly qualified or effective teachers. And given this reality, in addition to some of the challenges of recruiting effective staff, systems and schools really need to think about how to develop the staff that you have through effective professional learning and retain those who contribute to the school's growth and performance, so that you're building a cadre of leaders across all levels who can attain those ambitious results. So those strategies should really think about recruitment, feedback for that kind of professional learning and engagement, and how to identify and retain those high performers. So the first practice under this domain is to recruit, develop, retain, and sustain talent. It aligns with PSEL Standard 6. So as you think about this, think about how you can proactively plan for recruiting and developing talent with the competencies that are specific to drastic improvement to quickly fill vacancies. So you want to have a cadre of folks who have the kinds of competencies that fit the context and needs of the schools and the systems that need their support, ready to go to fill those vacancies. And there are specific competencies to rapid improvement, and we'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute, but trying to identify the competencies that will help them succeed in that particular context. Using multiple sources of data to match candidate skills and competencies to student needs, prioritizing the highest need students and schools. So not just relying on one brief interview to match the candidate skills and competencies, but thinking about, are there portfolios or other ways to look at different teachers, different leaders, and the kinds of skills and competencies that they would bring to the context. And prioritizing the highest need students in schools means that the schools and the students who need the teachers most, really making sure that high quality teachers are equitably distributed across the system, across the schools, to ensure that all students are getting high quality. Institute succession planning activities by creating in-house district or school preparation programs aligned with improvement competencies to develop future leaders and teachers. So how can you grow your own, so to speak? So creating those programs that will help identify potential leaders and provide them with the support that they need to develop their competencies to become even stronger teacher leaders, role models, and provide that kind of leadership across the system. So as you look at the role examples in the 4 domains document, you'll notice that some of the state and district roles for this practice focus on offering improvement preparation programs or models for selection and placement based on those competencies of successful improvement. So obviously not all systems have the capacity to build those kinds of programs, but think about how you can leverage some of the state leadership development programs or regional clusters of systems that come together to support that. I'm sure you might be interested in what this means about these competencies. So what are those specific skills to succeed in improvement? The Center on School Turnaround, we have the Turnaround Leader Competency modules, and Maryland also has the Professional Standards for Education Leaders. So thinking about those specific competencies that will help leaders and teachers thrive in the communities and contexts that need them the most. At the school level, the role outlined in the 4 domains document focuses on identifying the skills needed in your setting for teachers and leaders and really encouraging those aspiring leaders to participate in leadership development programs. So you want to provide that clear ladder for people to continue to develop their skills. The second practice under this domain is to target professional learning opportunities, and this aligns with PSEL Standard 6. So offering high quality, individualized, and responsive professional learning opportunities designed to build the capacity needed for rapid school improvement. So we know that different teachers and different leaders need different kinds of professional learning to develop the kind of competencies and skills needed to succeed. So it's not a one-size-fits-all in professional learning. It's really being responsive to the needs that will help develop those capacities. So having a mechanism to identify what those needs are and provide that customized, high-quality support for professionals to help develop their skills. Offering regular opportunities for job-embedded learning, including coaching, mentoring, and observation. And that also includes peer observation. We know there's a strong body of research about the importance of job-embedded learning, so making sure that it's real to what your teachers and leaders are trying to do. We learn best when we're applying in the moment. So thinking about where are those opportunities and not just making them these standalone one-shot deals, but really thinking about how do you embed that into the regular work. And finally, leveraging and maximizing the effectiveness of high-performing teachers, coaches, and leaders by using them as models and peer coaches. So we've talked about the importance of building that cadre of leaders and having a leadership team. Leaders are really across all levels of the school. And so if you have strong teachers providing coaching and support to other teachers, you're just continuing to build that strong leadership cadre across your school. So as you examine the role examples for this practice, you'll see that the state and system level role examples include modeling the elements of effective professional learning and using data to design the content of professional learning to match needs. So it's based on data of what kind of professional learning is being offered. At the school level, as you're developing that cadre of instructional leaders, you're pulling from assistant principals, department coordinators, coaches, lead teachers, who can respond to the professional learning needs of a manageable portion of the faculty to use data to identify those needs. So you're having sort of learning teams so that it's not just the principal who's responsible for helping to identify the professional learning needs of teachers, but that there's a cadre of leaders who can help support that across the school. The final practice within this domain is to set clear performance expectations, and this is aligned with PSEL Standard 6. So proactively planning for recruiting and developing talent with a competency specific to drastic improvement to quickly fill vacancies was something we talked about a little bit earlier. So if you've got this strong cadre of folks already ready to go, then you can have some really clear expectations for what they're working toward at various levels of the system. So they know when they become an assistant principal, these are the kinds of expectations for that role. They know that if they're an instructional coach, these are the expectations. So being very clear about each role in the system and how that contributes to those strong development of being able to meet your goals. And also developing and implementing performance management processes that include clear means for monitoring and measuring progress, flexibility to rapidly respond to professional learning needs, and opportunity to revise milestones as needed. You've probably heard a theme as we've started to go through these domains of using data to be responsive and flexible in the kind of support you're providing. And this really underscores the importance of having those progress monitoring pieces in place so that you know how well are the professional learning opportunities that you're offering meeting the needs of teachers and leaders. And if they're not, how can you respond to what those needs are as they change? And especially as you're making changes in your school or in your system, you're going to need different kinds of professional learning. So ensuring that you've embedded that into your process is really important. So you'll notice in the 4 domains document that the role of the state and the system or district is to clearly identify expectations for an environment of improvement and reflect those in job descriptions with realistic and high leverage responsibilities. At the school level, the role focuses on defining clear and realistic expectations for teachers and reflect the prioritization of effective use of teacher time. So things like schedules, so ensuring that there's protected time for teachers to collaborate and to plan, and that you're prioritizing. You've set those 3 to 5 clear priorities for the school. So how are you reflecting those priorities in the expectations that you have for teachers and the way that you're using teacher time and encouraging teachers to effectively use their time? Giving them protected time is a really important piece within this. So to make this real, as we think about what talent development looks like, in Maryland, Dr. Mary Minter is a school leadership and turnaround support specialist for the Maryland State Department of Education. Dr. Minter has experience as a chief academic officer and principal in a Maryland school system. Dr. Minter will share the strategies that she used to hire, train, and support talent.
As a principal, I made it a priority to staff my school with teachers that could build on the strengths of my students and address gaps in instruction at my school. If I was unable to find the highly qualified people that I needed, I would hire the best that I could find and then provide targeted professional learning experiences to build their capacity. I leveraged school operational dollars, grant funds, and support provided by my central office and State Department of Education to provide ongoing professional learning experiences. I established structures within the school building, such as designating lead teachers who would model and share effective practices to improve student performance, and scheduling time to regularly monitor instruction, provide actionable feedback, and listen to teachers. Talent development does not happen overnight. It takes purposeful steps to establish structures within the school building to foster the growth of educators and collaboration with human resources to recruit educators.
Thank you, Lene, and thank you, Dr. Minter. So as we talked about in the first module and the first domain, we discussed how these indicators are synonymous with effective implementation. These indicators also play an important role throughout the continuous improvement cycle. As you can see from the visual, MSDE's cycle of improvement begins with assessing needs, determining root causes to a problem of practice, followed by distinguishing current practice from desired state. It's this last one that we're really talking about here. What we'll ask you to think about as you go through each of these modules and think about these practices in your own context and the level and extent to which you're already implementing them is, what is the vision for effective implementation? One of the hallmarks of successful improvement efforts is that context matters. Long are the days of cookie-cutter school improvement. What works for your school may not work for your neighbor's school. During this initial phase, it's incredibly important to determine the status quo of current practices you have in place across the 4 domains. As you can see, the cycle then moves to creating and implementing a plan, monitoring the effectiveness of the work, and adjusting the course of action. So once you've determined the extent to which you're using effective practices and which ones you might be missing, you and your team can then decide where you need to focus your efforts. You can look at evidence of implementation and see, what might we need to work on more intently? What might we be missing? And turn these indicators into objectives for your school improvement plan. As we move further through the cycle and implementation is underway, we're going to sound like a broken record, but your ability as a leader to stay laser focused on progress is incredibly important. As we discussed earlier in why improvement efforts fail, and as you've heard throughout these modules, you can use these indicators to determine whether a practice is indeed being implemented with fidelity and whether it's indeed making an impact. You may find that if there's no evidence, then likely it's not. But again, the indicators we're about to talk about are not about impact, but rather just a first step in getting you to determine really where you are. What's your context? What are the needs in your building so that you can begin to build a plan to get you from your current state to your desired state? As Lene introduced us to Practice 2A, which was really about recruiting, developing, retaining, sustaining, we're talking about the talent in your building. Who are the folks that are going to be implementing these practices, implementing and creating this change? Dr. Mintersher provided an excellent example of how she implemented these effective practices. But what might this look like in your own? So really this practice is about engaging school personnel to identify the unique context of their school, of your school, and use this information to determine the priority competencies for teachers and leaders. What areas of focus might your teachers and leaders need to be trained in order to get you closer to your North Star? What might this mean for you? Maybe you collaborate, as Lene shared, with the district to develop school-specific competency model or a list of skills that you're looking for your teachers to discern which competencies should be prioritized in the teacher selection process based on the strengths and weaknesses of your students and your staff in meeting their needs. What do you need your staff to know and be able to do, just like we think about our students? Maybe you encourage aspiring teacher leaders to participate in school improvement prep programs. Maybe you're looking for specific instructional needs that we'll talk about a little bit deeper when we get to Domain 3 about instructional transformation. But depending on what you implement, evidence of implementation that you'll find in the blue text could be about tracking preparation programs where your successful staff have originated from. Maybe it's about a school staff competency needs and shared with the district as determined by your current staff. Maybe it's about the description of activities and related procedures that you find in the school to determine what the professional development opportunities and needs are of your teachers. Let's look at Practice 2B. Practice 2B was about targeting professional learning opportunities. So some ways that leaders can enact this practice could be around, as Lene shared, creating a cadre of instructional leaders. Maybe you draw from the district's assistant principals, department coordinators, team leaders, teachers with demonstrated instructional coaching capacity, who then each respond to the professional learning needs based on those needs of a manageable portion of staff. Maybe this is 3 to 5. Maybe this is only 1 to 2 if you can't support extended release time for these coaches or for these staff. This help can be done through a coaching program, mentoring, observation, but really should be determined by data to identify what those needs are and working with staff to determine what might be the best mechanism to meet those needs. You could provide opportunities for leaders and teachers to learn side by side and share how their own growth impacts their individual practice as instructional and organizational leaders, and then determine whether their practice is improving. It's really important to ensure that learning experiences on the part of staff are differentiated, purposeful, targeted, and employed in rapid response to identified needs. And then, as Lene shared, and also embedded within practice. Learning experiences should be reflective of what is known about effective adult learning and clearly connected to schools' improvement priorities. As we'll emphasize in Domain 4 around culture shift, sometimes providing the opportunities for teachers to learn based on both where their needs are, what the students need, really helps ensure their retention and helps build and create that culture shift. Some evidence of implementation in this practice area may include agendas, notes where professional needs were determined or documented, schedules of professional learning that are aligned to staff needs, ways in which teachers and staff will be supported and who will be supporting them so that there's no question about who they can turn to and talk to and support. Practice 2C is really about setting clear performance expectations. So maybe this includes you providing clear written expectations for teachers and leaders in terms of their roles, their level of effort, expected outcomes. How might each staff in your building help to get you closer to your school improvement goals? What might be the role, responsibility, and function of each member on your team to getting you toward your North Star? And how might you examine to make sure that these leaders, that these teacher leader roles and responsibilities are effective and appropriate? It's really important to define expectations for teachers, to clearly and realistically consider how to effectively leverage teacher time and effort to meet improvement goals. Perhaps that includes developing a daily and weekly schedule that reflects this priority and effective use of teacher time. But keep in mind, when asking more of a teacher, when laying out their roles and responsibilities and how they may ensure improvement efforts are effective, consider removing other responsibilities instead of just piling it on. When we discussed earlier about successful improvements failing, this is a common one. There is an expectation on paper, but maybe not so much in reality. Take a careful look at all teachers are asked to do and remove what's not driving improvement. Some evidence of implementation here might be job and role descriptions, might be school calendars where you lay out by day, week, and month that include common collaborative time, professional learning, and review of student data, among other things. So as you reflect on your own practices regarding talent development, feel free to flip back through the slides and think about what level of enactment, how far and how intently are you utilizing these practices of effective implementation, and what kinds of evidence of implementation do you have to show how much and how dedicated you are in this area. As we mentioned in the first domain, you can find the Word document that contains these questions that leaders at the state, district, and school level can ask themselves about implementing system-wide data-informed change. You'll find those in the resource section. Please reflect on these questions. Again, if you're completing this workshop to earn continuing professional development credits, then your answers must be submitted to the Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement. I'd like to turn it back over to Lene Dunn to take us through Domain 3, Instructional Transformation. Lene?
Thank you, Amy. So the third domain in the framework focuses on what really is the heart of change, which is teaching and learning, instructional transformation. As we mentioned when we discussed some of the other domains, these domains are really meant to work together. So not really in isolation, but do think about how does a focus on instructional transformation, what are some of the themes that you see streaming across the domains? Instructional transformation focuses on improvement in student learning outcomes. And that really depends on a system-wide support for change and improvements in the classroom, including high-level instructional practice, strong standards-based instruction, data-based planning, differentiation and individualization, research-based pedagogical approaches, and classroom management. The school principal may or may not be the recognized instructional leader. That really varies with each school, but the principal is the systems engineer of the school site and can really create the capacity for a cohesive approach to a highly focused, highly skilled classroom instruction, inclusive of some of these key elements. Schools cultivate an environment of both high expectations and support for students' academic accomplishment. While school systems and schools strive to focus their organization's attention on the in-school factors impacting student performance, they also attempt to address the factors that are traditionally non-school based, like health or nutrition, so that every student comes to the task of learning ready for the challenge. So we'll dive into these practices and give each one some consideration. Before we do that, we want to do the big so what. So what do we take away from this focus on instructional transformation? It's that there should be both high expectations and high support to ensure there's data-driven, rigorous, system-wide support for high-quality instruction. To support instructional transformation system-wide means that the school system and the state identify the needs and provide support to schools trying to improve instruction. At the state level, this could be clear standards and professional development around those standards. At the district level, this could be infusing high expectations for all students through curricular guidelines. And obviously at the school level is really where the heart of this work happens, that school leaders, coaches, and teachers are focused on that data-driven, rigorous curriculum and ensuring that students have the support that they need to be able to access that curriculum. We know that there is strong evidence that having routine assessments really built into the learning process can really help students master the content and really support student learning. So think about how that data-driven theme goes throughout instruction to ensure that that instructional transformation is providing students with access to that high-quality, rigorous curriculum. So like the other domains, there are 3 practices within this domain. The first is to diagnose and respond to student learning needs. And this is aligned with PSEL Standard 5. So diagnose student learning needs and use identified needs to drive all instructional decisions. So really using data to find out where students have those instructional needs and use that to make decisions about instruction. So that really can happen at all levels of the system. But teachers obviously hold a lot of the responsibility with this, and they need the support for ensuring that there are mechanisms to diagnose the student learning needs and to make those instructional decisions, and that they're given the space and the time and the support to do so. Incorporate effective student supports and instructional interventions. So, of course, Tier 1 instruction or core instruction needs to be high quality and accessible for students. And there are sometimes additional supports that students need in order to be successful with a curriculum or instructional interventions. So incorporating those as a system and ensuring that those all work together to provide students with the high quality instruction that matches their needs and provides them the support they need. And then using fluid, rapid assessment and adjustment of instructional grouping and delivery to adapt to student learning needs. Really, this means that you're not using the same instructional grouping for the entire year, that obviously you're using that data to make those adjustments so that that instructional grouping is fluid and students can get the support they need in different weeks or day to day, depending on how you're structuring your classroom or how teachers in your school are structuring your classroom and instruction, but ensuring that there's that fluidity and also that ability to use data to make those rapid decisions about how to meet student learning needs. As you look at the roles in the 4 domains framework document across the system to support this practice, you'll notice that the state and district roles include incentivizing and structuring systemic improvements to ensure teachers have the time and capacity to diagnose and respond to student learning needs. So this could mean trainings or protocols, assessment tools, or examples of schedules, things to ensure that protected time that we've talked about in some of the other domains as well. At the school level, there's a focus on using data in a flexible and informative way to support students and providing teachers with a time and expectation that they use that data to develop and carry out plans to support student learning. So helping teachers to have that ability to create plans to meet student learning needs and the flexibility they need to meet those needs. The next practice within Domain 3 is to provide rigorous evidence-based instruction, and this aligns with PSEL Standard 4. So setting high academic standards and ensuring access to rigorous standard-based curricula. We know how important it is to use a high-quality curriculum that's based in standards and has high expectations for students. We also know how important it is to provide support to be able to access that. So providing support to ensure that evidence is used in instructional planning and facilitation of student learning. So that teachers are using evidence from that students are producing every day in class and using that evidence to help think about how to meet those student learning needs. And also, as gaps are identified in the curriculum or instructional delivery, developing plans to strengthen those key components. So those gaps may be for particular students. There's additional materials or supports that are needed. Or there are certain components that need to be further emphasized. So ensuring that you're always thinking about where those gaps are and how to meet and address those. The state and school system role highlighted in the examples in the 4-domain document include providing professional learning and guidance on content and evidence-based instruction and support. At the school level, this role really includes conducting things like a curriculum analysis or mapping lesson plans against standards to ensure that those plans represent the standards and all students have access to the curricula. So how are you ensuring that that evidence-based curriculum is meeting the needs of students and that you're providing that access to those standards for all students and they're getting that rigorous instruction? The final practice within this domain is to remove barriers and provide opportunities, and this is aligned with PSEL Standard 8. So one is really thinking about how do you systematically identify barriers to student learning and those opportunities to enhance learning for students who demonstrate early mastery. So this instructional transformation domain really broadens the student-centered approach to school improvement beyond classroom practice and really thinks about a variety of programs and supports to increase achievement for all students. So barriers for one student might be different than barriers for other students. So what are those barriers? And on the same hand, on the same page, ensuring that there are opportunities for students who are able to demonstrate that early mastery so they're continuing to be challenged. So policies, interventions, and programs can address both low-achieving students to ensure their growth and high-achieving students ready for those higher-level academic experiences. The second component of this is really thinking about how to leverage those community-based organizations like health and wellness organizations, youth organizations, or other service providers to support students in overcoming obstacles and developing the personal competencies that propel success in school and life. So those organizations outside the school or the school system can play a role in supporting the individual needs and challenges that some students face. Role examples for the state and district within this practice include developing early warning systems to identify students in need of support, connecting to state-level entities for support, or identifying and removing policy and practice barriers and leveraging community resources to meet student needs. At the school level, tracking student progress and offering opportunities is really the focus. So for school leaders and school leadership team, this could mean more traditional opportunities like credit recovery or higher level courses, or less traditional approaches to remove barriers like access to healthcare or hygiene services. Laura Liccioni is a school leadership and turnaround specialist in the Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement. She has experience as a middle school teacher and a school performance coach. To make this domain real, Ms. Liccioni will share how a system transformed instruction.
There is plenty of research that supports the need for students to engage in high-quality, standards-based instruction, and there is research that demonstrates effective strategies to assess learning through formative and summative methods. Yet we don't always see it in practice. So the question becomes why? An essential step to addressing the why is to analyze student data. Analysis of data will help to focus improvement efforts. For example, analysis of state assessment data revealed that students in a school system struggled with comparing two or more texts. This prompted a review of the curriculum to see if this skill was emphasized in the curriculum. Vetting of the curriculum revealed significant gaps in standards, alignment, and formative assessment. Targeted professional learning experiences and instructional resources were provided to help fill the gaps until a new curriculum was adopted. For example, effective evidence-based instructional strategies such as flexible grouping, aligning standards to formative assessment processes, and how to analyze student work using protocols was modeled for teachers. To ensure that practices were implemented, principals were coached on how to lead and monitor instruction in these practices. We began to see signs of growth in the areas of focus evident during the follow-up walkthroughs and local assessment data.
Thank you, Laura. If you've watched the other domains, we've discussed what we're going to get into next, which is indicators of effective practice. And what these indicators really help you do is set you up for success, help you visualize what effective implementation of these practices look like. What we found in research is that if you can visualize it, you're much more likely to implement it effectively. These indicators are also here to help you determine where you may need to focus your school improvement efforts, where you may need to beef up efforts or intention, or maybe you've already got a great handle and solid implementation in some areas, and that way you can focus on others that maybe need some more attention. In practice, in this domain, instructional transformation, Lene shared several practices pertaining to student data. So practice 3A was about diagnosing and responding to student learning needs. What are some indicators of effective practice? You'll see those in the black text on the slides. What might this look like when done effectively? So maybe this is about school teams sitting down and meeting regularly. And when we say regularly, at least monthly is most effective to review implementation data. What that might include could be documentation from classroom walkthroughs, practice fidelity, training, coaching, as well as student data. Academic data, could be benchmark data, could be school exit tickets or class exit tickets, as well as socio and behavioral, disciplinary data, attendance data, chronic absenteeism data for all students, and then for individual students as well. If you're not already doing so, or maybe not doing so as effectively, this could be really instituting a regular time to examine this individual and school-wide student data, as well as implementation data. You can carry this out in team meetings, in PLCs, or other planning sessions as part of teachers' regular work and expectations. But to really be effective, again, this should be happening at least monthly. You can certainly creatively use fluid instructional groupings rather than year-long assignments that may not meet students' and teachers' needs. So as you're looking at data and finding groups of students that are struggling on particular areas, giving teachers the freedom to group students pertaining to need might be what they need to meet their needs most effectively. In this practice, it's important that teachers are given time within the school day to conduct analysis and develop plans to address identified student needs. It's also important that teachers are held accountable for doing so and for carrying out the plans they develop for students. It's important that progress is monitored to determine whether these plans have been effective, and then working to address or determine other ways of meeting students' needs if they haven't been as effective. So think about how Domain 2, talent, and Domain 1, leadership, might intersect here. What competencies do teachers need to be able to carry out these responsibilities? Do they know how to use data to inform their instruction? Do they know how to analyze and look at student abilities to determine where their needs may lie? How can leadership staff ensure that teachers get the support they need to conduct these activities effectively? How can building these skills be incorporated into professional learning plans? So some evidence of implementation that you'll find in the blue text, depending on what you end up implementing, may include a codified data review process and procedures, may include expectations for teachers and the training to meet those expectations, may mean the leadership team sits down with teachers to develop this process and conduct this process. You may create instructional group descriptions. It goes without saying that for each area of evidence and each of these indicators of practice, it's really about what makes sense in your context. These evidence of implementation are not a checklist, and they're certainly not the end of the planning process. But what they do is they help communicate expectations. They help communicate rationale and reasons why. And they help monitor progress in terms of what is being implemented, how well, and if impact isn't happening, can help you determine why that might be so. Let's take a look at Practice 3B. Practice 3B in this domain is about providing rigorous evidence-based, standards-aligned instruction. So how might you go about implementing this practice effectively? What might this look like? Maybe it means creating a menu of opportunities that are evidence-based instructional practices aligned and adequately representing state standards for teachers to use and utilize throughout their planning process. As Laura mentioned, when they did their curriculum review, what they found was that even though there was a pacing guide, there were quite a bit of gaps in what teachers were teaching, and those gaps contributed to student learning gaps. And so in creating this menu, ensuring that it's standards-based, but also standards encompassing for teachers to choose from. It's also important when implementing evidence-based instructional practices that those practices meet the needs of your students, that selecting practices is based both on whether it's evidence-based, but also meeting the needs of your students and helping you implement and get to your improvement goals. Maybe it means, in your own context, conducting a curriculum analysis and mapping lesson plans against the standards to ensure that plans are adequately representing the standards. Maybe it means you determine whether adjustments and supports are needed to ensure that all students have access to the curriculum. If teachers are using different instructional modes, whether that be whole class or small group, independent work, technology-based, or homework, that teachers routinely utilize the best instructional practices for that mode, and school leaders support development of those practices. School leaders should be well-versed in pedagogy as well as content. If not, work to develop these skills. So some evidence that may be appropriate in your context could include curricular resources and a crosswalk to the standards and rigor levels that check to see what you're using and the pace by which you're asking teachers to move does in fact include the standards and at the level of rigor that the standards require. Maybe that means lesson plans and observation data to see what modes are being implemented and which ones are most effective. Maybe evidence could include training materials on how you're working to develop teachers' competencies and skills in meeting students' needs or in the content area or in pedagogical modes, depending on their needs as determined by their professional learning goals. Practice 3C was about removing barriers and providing opportunities. Some effective implementation of this practice may include tracking student progress and helping students regain lost ground through academic supports. So really figuring out what it is that students know and can do and where they may have gaps in their own learning. And then determining what would be the best way to catch them up or to accelerate their learning. Maybe this is done through tutoring, either small group or one-on-one. Maybe this are co-curricular activities and embedding reading and math in science and social studies, if that's a more appropriate way to build their skills. Maybe it's through tiered interventions. Maybe it's through extended learning opportunities like summer bridge programs or after school and supplemental education services. Maybe it's through Saturday academies, if that's possible in your district. Or maybe it's through enrichment programs. If you're at the high school, perhaps it's credit recovery programs, virtual courses. But again, it's important to not only help students that may be missing, but also to continue to push students who may be on grade level and are looking for more. So give students demonstrating sufficient prior mastery access to higher level assignments and courses. If possible, network with nearby organizations in the community and identify available supports, or generate new supports. Consider having medical and dental services available on-site on a regular basis. Provide on-site laundry service for families in need. Some schools have provided food for students during extended learning sessions and other periods when students are at school outside of regular school hours. Again, helping to shift the culture to focusing on what students need to be successful in life after school instead of what some of those obstacles to learning might be. As you reflect on the progress and what progress means in your own context, consider how will you know that instructional transformation has effectively been implemented? What should you look for? Some evidence here may include, again, that menu of community and social services that you can draw on, that you can provide to teachers if they see that students are in need of specific services. It might be student action plans to meet their specific needs. As you reflect on this domain, feel free to click back through. Feel free to look at what some of the practices and evidence of effective implementation might be appropriate for your own context. Use these questions to reflect on your own practices and needs. Again, you can find this Word document in the resources section of the webinar materials. If you are completing this workshop to earn continuing professional development credits, we ask that your answers be submitted to the Office of School Leadership Development and School Improvement at MSDE. And at this time, I'd like to turn it back to Lene to do a deeper dive into Domain 4, Culture Shift.
Thank you, Amy. So as we discussed throughout each of these domains, they really all work together to help transform a school for rapid improvement. Culture shift, there's really about what the school environment feels like and how students are supported to meet high expectations within a culture of supported learning. So let's talk a little bit about what that looks like. For Domain 4 Culture Shift, it really is important to keep in mind that it occurs not just at the tactical level of actually making those changes for culture, but at much deeper levels of an organization, creating a shared commitment and connection to mutual values. A positive school climate reflects a supportive and fulfilling environment, learning conditions that meet the needs of all students, people who are sure of their roles and relationships in student learning, like we talked about in the talent development, that people know what roles, the second domain, and focus on student learning, like we talked about in the third domain of instructional transformation, and a culture that values trust, respect, and high expectations. And that's further reinforced in Domain 1 of leadership. A successful improvement depends on many people working together to achieve extraordinary results. Attaining the necessary level of commitment to achieve these results requires a dramatic culture shift towards both high academic expectations and concerted effort. A culture of improvement fuses strong community cohesion with an overt academic focus. One without the other is not sufficient. Leadership establishes the structures and opportunities for faculty and staff to work together around common goals, engendering a culture of mutual respect, shared responsibility, and focused attention on student learning. State, system level, and school leaders engage families to support their children's learning and the overall improvement effort. A strong school community attends to the culture both inside and outside of the school, with leaders gathering input from stakeholders, including the community, and gauging perceptions about the school and the improvement effort. Students are challenged and supported to aim higher, work harder, and realize the satisfaction of accomplishment. As with the other domains, we have 3 practices within Culture Shift, and we're going to talk pretty intently about each of them, but I first want to talk about what is the big takeaway from this domain. It's important to note that that culture and climate really matter. There is a strong body of research that culture and climate can influence student learning. If students feel safe and supported and in a strong learning community, they can learn much better than if they're in a community where they're not feeling supported or they feel excluded. We know that it really matters, and culture and climate can influence what happens with students and their learning. But the good news is that we also know that culture and climate can improve with focus and intent. So there are a lot of different interventions and supports that if the culture and climate is improved, or if those are implemented, we know that the culture and climate can improve. So that positive climate is important, and we can attain it. So how do we do that? What are the elements of the building blocks for that? Well, we have the 3 practices within this domain of culture and climate. The first one is to build a strong community focused on student learning. This aligns with PSEL Standard 7. So one is to celebrate successes. Start with quick wins early in the improvement process. Students, families, teachers, and leaders, the whole school community. Early success promotes an expectation for further success and engenders that confidence in the competence of your colleagues and of your community. Celebrating early wins shows faculty, staff, and community members that change is possible and that improvement is an attainable goal that's within reach. Celebrating builds a common experience and provides the opportunity to call out the hard work of those who are following leaders' example and vision. Shifting culture is reliant on building momentum while creating consistency and sustainability. Provide explicit expectations and support for each person's role. Remember, we talked about in the second domain of talent development how important it is that the roles and responsibilities are clear. This is also really important when you think about culture shift, providing the expectations for behaviors and actions both in the improvement effort and in student progress. So there are consistent expectations tied to the roles to help create that structure while demonstrating to individuals the importance of their work and their contribution to the culture. Providing support makes success more likely, thereby fostering ownership for the tenets and strategies adopted as part of the improvement effort. Create opportunities for members of the school community, and that's really a broad definition of the school community that includes parents, families, community members, as well as faculty, staff, students. But really creating the opportunities for that whole community to come together to discuss, explore, and reflect on student learning. Student learning is at the center. Create those opportunities for them. Really, invite community members into the school. It really helps increase the ownership and the bond that school systems need from the surrounding communities. When community members become a part of the school or district's improvement strategy, they see the school and the school system not as institutions, but as the individuals within that institution united in a common cause to directly impact student achievement. Also, to champion high expectations, both of yourself and others, and embed them and reinforce them through shared accountability and follow through on strategies for dramatically improving student outcomes. A culture shift requires acknowledging the current state So recognizing where you are, but in the context of moving to a desired state of higher learning for students. High expectations allow educators and community members to focus together on moving the system forward and giving the school improvement effort a stated set of outcomes that become part of the school and community dialogue embedded in everyday language. And while accountability is often an overused term, teachers and staff value honoring commitments to their students and to each other. As you look at the 4 domains for Rapid School Improvement document, you'll notice that some of the role for the state and the district in the role examples include providing tools to track and analyze data that indicate culture and culture shift, policies to ensure a challenging curriculum for all students, and opportunities to share successes across schools. At the school level, as school leaders or leadership team, the focus is on establishing systems for collaborative work, positive classroom cultures, and recognition routines. So how are you recognizing those successes? How are you leveraging those successes? How are you helping to build a culture where high expectations are provided and celebrating the successes as you get there is part of what you do every day. The second practice within this domain of culture shift is to solicit and act upon stakeholder input. And this aligns with PSEL S8, Standard 8 and 11. So it's really important to gather perceptions from the broad school community. So that includes school personnel, students, families, and community members about the school climate. These perceptions are used to gauge climate-related work and the progress made by the school. Consider stakeholder perceptions when identifying priorities and identifying and improving the underlying conditions that contribute to school climate issues. So this relates back to within Domain 1, as you think about identifying priorities, use stakeholder perceptions. Those are really important when you're thinking about the priorities and thinking about what's contributing to the current school climate. But it's also important to acknowledge and respond to constructive feedback, suggestions, and criticism. So really using that input, so you're acting upon it. You're not just collecting that input through a survey and not using that. You're collecting input and using that input to really help make some positive changes. For this practice, some of the role examples in the framework document for the state and district or school system staff include providing instruments and protocols to collect that stakeholder data. So that could be surveys or focus group or town hall meeting structures, and providing training for school leaders on how to use these data and to act on that feedback. At the school leader level, it's really conducting those surveys, forums, focus groups, or even suggestion boxes to really help learn what constituents think, and constituents include students. And really using that to act on what you learn to demonstrate that those voices are heard and are used when making key decisions. The third practice, which it looks like there might be a slide missing, but I can talk you through that third practice, is really to engage students and families in pursuing educational goals. So this aligns with PSEL Standard 8. So intentionally building students' personal competencies to pursue goals, persist with tasks, appraise their progress, hone learning strategies, and direct their own learning to further enhance their capacity to succeed. So helping students really have that internal motivation to be able to succeed. Provide students with opportunities to connect their learning in school with their interests and their aspirations. We know that when students have a connection to the material, that they're going to be more motivated to work with that material and be able to see themselves in the material. So really providing that interest and engagement really helps students connect their learning to real-life application. And then finally, meaningfully engage parents in their child's learning, progress, interests, and long-term goals. So Parent engagement, we know there's a wide body of research about how important it is for parents to be engaged, but we know that that engagement should be centered around helping students achieve their learning goals. So giving them that meaningful role in supporting their child and their learning. The state and district role in this practice could include providing professional learning on meaningful family engagement, providing policies and structures, so that could be things like a line in the budget or a requirement to report to the board on the culture and climate issues, for encouraging parent engagement and improved student learning. The school role focuses on building student skills and setting learning goals, pursuing those goals, charting progress, and involving families in supporting their student goals. So to see this domain in action, culture shift, we are going to hear from Dr. Felicia Lanham-Terrison. She's a school leadership and turnaround support specialist in the Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement. She has experience as a principal and Title I director in Maryland Public Schools. Dr. Lanham-Terrison will share how she established relationships with staff, parents, and students to build a strong community focused on student learning.
During my years as an elementary school principal, I opened each school year with a quote by Henry Ford with the staff and community. Coming together is a beginning. Keeping together is progress. Working together is success. I realized that changing the culture in a school would depend on people working together and making a commitment to improve student achievement. We had 3 goals to accomplish in order to make a culture shift and create a positive school climate. Our first goal was to build a strong community focused on student learning. It was important that students felt safe and supported with their needs, challenges, and concerns. We established structures, procedures, and routines for staff to collaborate on mutual respect, shared responsibility, student effort, and academic mastery. Each incremental movement or improvement was celebrated while staying focused on student growth. This promoted an expectation for further success and built the confidence of the staff. We realized as a staff that the families are also an essential asset in the turnaround process. Throughout the year, we created opportunities for the school community to discuss, explore, reflect, and provide input on student learning. The second goal was to solicit and act upon stakeholder input. We developed a plan for gathering their perceptions about the school climate. Focus groups were established, forums were held, and suggestion boxes were placed throughout the building. Their perceptions were considered when identifying priorities and improving the underlying conditions that contributed to school climate issues. I, as principal, acknowledged and responded to feedback, suggestions, and criticism because it was important for the stakeholders to be acknowledged and know that their voices were heard. The last goal was to engage students and families in pursuing education goals. Our task was to help build students' personal competencies and help them to further enhance their capacity to learn and succeed. An individual plan was developed by staff for each student reflecting their learning goals. Student progress was charted to manage their learning and continuing progress of their goals.
Thank you, Lene, and thank you, Dr. Lanham-Terrison. So now we're going to move into indicators of effective practice. And if you've listened to the other domains and the intros to these indicators, you know that they play an important role throughout the continuous improvement cycle. You also know that they're a way for you to envision what effective practice may look like. They're a way for you to determine what your context is currently doing. How are these practices currently being enacted, and to what degree of effectiveness are you utilizing practices contained in this domain? As we know, looking at the continuous improvement cycle, which is now up, Determining what the status quo of current practices in your own context is really important, just like it is for students, because then you can determine where's your launching point. Where do you need to work, and where are you already doing an effective job? As we think about these effective practices and what Dr. Lanham-Terrison just shared, think about how those practices brought the 4 domains together. Again, I want to caution you that these practices will certainly help set you up for success, but they don't guarantee it. This is not a playbook or a checklist or an instruction manual, but really just a way for you to envision and implement practices found to be effective and to do so effectively. We use effective a lot. What they won't tell you is whether the practice was effective. Monitoring progress and determining implementation and impact is so important. So let's move on to some of the practices in this 4th domain around culture shift. Lene shared that practice 4A is about building a strong community intensely focused on learning. What does this mean? What might this look like? Well, it might look like all school personnel organized into teams, and those teams have clearly defined purposes we talked about in Domain 1. But those purposes are related to improving practice and enhancing student learning. Maybe they have regular meeting times and work products, and they've been trained to do so, as we talked about in Domain 2. And those improvement practices help to address student learning needs and instructional gaps, as we talked about in Domain 3. What this domain really emphasizes, though, is also pulling in and gathering input from a variety of stakeholders, partnering with parents. So maybe at your school, an effective practice to be implemented is creating a team that includes both teachers and parents who oversee the school and home relationships, that partnership development in order to enhance student learning. And that team operates with clearly defined purposes, has regular meeting times, work products, and is supported and anchored by you as the leader. This may mean leadership clearly defining and documenting and annually reviewing the roles, responsibilities, and expectations relative to students' learning. This includes both the roles and responsibilities for administrators as well as teachers, but also gets into how can parents partner with schools to reinforce what is happening in the classroom. How might other staff be included in meeting students' needs? How may you include volunteers and students themselves? As Felicia described, it's really important, and what this domain emphasizes and upholds is the establishment of systems, structures, policies, procedures, routines for focused collaborative work, recognizing student effort and academic mastery, but also supporting students in obtaining that mastery. Recognizing job satisfaction and camaraderie among staff as essential assets in the improvement process. If teacher turnover is an issue at your school, determining why teachers are leaving may be one of the linchpins to helping your improvement efforts flourish. Helping to maintain a positive, encouraging classroom and school culture for students, where students feel safe and supported. This will not only encourage them to share their needs, struggles, and concerns, but also help others feel that they can go above and beyond to make sure those needs are met. Recognize incremental improvement, recognizing those quick wins so folks don't get discouraged. But ultimately keeping the focus on results at the student, teacher, and school levels. Don't be afraid to celebrate team accomplishments and offer recognition for hard work and improvement. Frequently and openly review and discuss with stakeholders. That can include parents, volunteers, teachers, staff, how things are going with improvement process. Again, including those leading and lagging indicators. Evidence of implementation of this practice may include, and you can see some examples in the blue text on the slide, if you institute a parent-teacher team, it could be the description of that team, the goals and expectations, how that teacher team is helping to enhance student learning so that they can keep themselves accountable. Who's on that team? And maybe some team meeting materials. So as you reflect on the practice of that parent-teacher team, you can begin to determine how effective was it, how much of an impact did it make, and what some of those mid-course corrections or changes may need to be made to make it more effective. Publicly posting roles, responsibilities, and expectations of all stakeholders involved regarding student learning. Sometimes this comes in the form of a student-teacher-parent agreement. Some schools even call it a contract. But ensuring that folks know what their roles and responsibilities are in meeting expectations. Practice 4A and B. Practice 4B was about soliciting and acting upon stakeholder input. This input could be incredibly essential to student learning needs and could be easily established through a parent-teacher team. This may consist of, as Felicia shared, conducting focus groups, having suggestion boxes, and then acting upon those suggestions. Take constituent input into account when making programmatic decisions. Consistently demonstrate that all voices are both sought and heard. So as Lene shared, maybe this takes the form of a school climate survey or a satisfaction survey, but includes surveying school personnel, families, students to gauge perceptions about the school, its level of effectiveness, and how parents, staff, and students feel their place is within the school. Maybe there's more formalized, they don't have to be formal, but maybe more formalized planned activities of two-way communication and face-to-face association among school personnel, students, and students' families to work together to advance student learning. If the same 4 families are showing up at parent-teacher association meetings or back-to-school night, maybe figuring out what kind of a meeting structure and schedule would work for parents and soliciting their input to determine what kind of a mechanism for encouraging parent participation that might be. As we look at practice 4C, which is engaging students and families in pursuing educational goals, one area and one way this may play out in your school system and in your school may be programmatically and systematically building student skills in setting their own learning goals, managing their learning, pursuing their goals by charting progress on coursework, and perhaps, if it's appropriate, their secondary goals. So do students know where they need to increase their learning? if they're looking to go into a particular career area, do they know what classes or what skills would make them more likely to be successful in those areas, and help them back map their planning, their own learning goals toward that career area. Inform and engage families in planning and supporting their students' education goals. Provide students and their families with a full explanation of assessment results and interest inventories to help them make the best decisions. Solicit feedback on how well the school is meeting those goals and ways in which they can be improved. And again, one way that this may be effectively implemented is to tap community resources and expertise to expand students' understanding of potential careers and educational options. Do students have a wide variety of career offerings that they know about? Do they have career pathways explicitly taught or understood? Do they know the ways in which they can get from their own schooling to where they'd like to be in life later on, and helping them get there, and helping their families understand where students are aspiring to go and how they can uphold and support them. So as you reflect on this domain and the practices within, what does progress look like? How will you know that an effective culture has been created? What might you look for? Depending on how these practices have been implemented in your own context, some evidence of implementation might include agendas, minutes, meeting materials from leadership team meetings and community meetings where you've analyzed survey data collected and what your concrete next steps are, or soliciting ideas for concrete next steps and actions. It might be the sharing of interest inventory information with parents and an explanation of what that means. So as you reflect on this domain, again, feel free, as we've talked about in the other domains, to think about how these practices may already be implemented in your own context, or how they may look if implemented more effectively in your context. Again, you can find the reflection question Word document in the resource section of this webinar. And the questions are those in which leaders at the building level, the state level, the district level can really ask themselves about implementing a system-wide data-informed change. Again, if you're looking to earn CVD credit, please submit your reflections in response to these questions to the Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Tiara Booker-Dwyer, who's going to wrap us up and talk about the survey and next steps. Tiara?
Thank you, Amy. So thank you all for participating in the Effective School Improvement Practices workshop. There are 4 parts to the workshop. Please be sure that you review all 4 parts and complete the survey to provide feedback. If you are participating in this workshop to earn continuing professional development credits, then you must complete and submit answers to the reflection questions at the end of each domain. Share the information that you have learned about the 4 domains of rapid school improvement with your school leadership team as your framework to improve school performance. Please contact the Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement with any questions. We are always here to support you in improving educational outcomes for students. Thank you.